All right, so we're diving deep today into some pretty fascinating advice about business and leadership.
Yeah, some real gems in here.
Yeah, it's from someone who's been there and done that. So we're not talking theory here. This is straight from the trenches stuff.
Exactly. This is like a, distilled experience from someone who's actually been in the arena and, come out on top. So
Yeah. So much to unpack. One thing that really jumped out at me right off the bat is this emphasis on people. It's almost like location, resources, all that sort of takes a backseat to getting the right team.
It's funny you say that because that's the first thing I noticed too. It's like this idea that talent is your biggest multiplier. Even if the opportunity is just, average, the right people can turn it into something truly remarkable.
Okay, so how do you find those people? There's this intriguing thing here about always going straight to the boss. What do you think that tells us about navigating power dynamics, especially in a negotiation?
It's a really interesting point. I think it speaks to a strategic mindset. You're going directly to the decision maker.
Cutting through the noise.
Exactly. Cutting through all the noise. You're not getting bogged down in, bureaucracy. And you potentially increase your chances of a favorable outcome.
Yeah, I can see that. But wouldn't that be considered maybe a little aggressive? I mean, bypassing all the usual channels?
Perhaps. But there's also this underlying belief here that negotiation is an inherent skill, something you're born with. It's not about, being forceful. It's about understanding human nature and using that to your advantage.
Okay, that's fascinating. Because it almost suggests that anyone can become a good negotiator if they just hone those skills.
Exactly. Think of it like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Oh, okay.
And this source really stresses that part of successful negotiation, it hinges on reputation and honoring agreements.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you're known for your integrity, keeping your word, people are going to trust you.
It's about building long-term trust.
Right. Not just, trying to win every single deal.
Because the consequences of breaking an agreement or damaging your reputation, they can last for years.
They can come back to bite you. Okay, here's where things get really interesting. There's this phrase, God is in the details.
Oh, yeah.
Which initially sounds kind of philosophical, but then it's illustrated with this, really down-to-earth analogy about selling used cars.
I love that because it takes this, kind of abstract idea and it makes it so relatable.
Yeah.
Whether you're building a skyscraper or you're selling that used car, all those little details, the extra care you put in, it all adds up.
So it's not just about the big picture. It's about those small things, too.
Exactly.
So you're communicating that you take pride in what you do.
You got it.
And that you respect the people you're doing it for.
100%. And that leads to, I think, another really interesting piece of advice, which is never beg when you're selling something.
Okay, explain that one. Because at first I was like, huh.
Yeah, it's a bold statement.
It is.
But there's some truth there. I think when you come across as desperate, you diminish the value of what you're offering.
It's almost like you're saying, this must not be that good if I got to beg you to buy it.
Right. And it goes back to that belief in your product or service. If you really believe in it, that confidence comes through. And you never have to beg.
That passion. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, there's this idea of thinking big, which really intrigued me.
Yeah.
It's presented as if thinking big actually makes it easier to attract resources, which, seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, I get that. But think about it this way. Those bold ideas, those ambitious projects, they tend to capture people's imagination.
It creates buzz.
They create a buzz, and that buzz attracts resources.
There's that great anecdote about the massive golf course project that really illustrates this point.
I love that story.
Oh, it's so good.
It's not just about building a golf course. It's about creating something world-class, something exceptional. And that kind of ambition, it draws people in.
People want to be a part of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not just the idea, but the scale, the ambition.
It's the audacity.
Yeah. Okay, so that's where passion comes in again. I mean, this source is really hammering home that loving what you do is crucial. For success, it's everything.
Right. It fuels your drive, it helps you overcome obstacles, and it makes the whole thing more enjoyable, even when things get tough. If you're not passionate about it, it's going to be a slog.
Why bother?
Yeah.
Especially if you're talking about these massive, ambitious undertakings.
Exactly. Passion is the fuel.
Keeps you going.
Keeps you going. Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about loyalty. There's a really strong stance on this, almost to the point of a one-strike rule.
Yeah.
Is there any room for nuance here? I mean, obviously loyalty is important,
Yeah.
especially when building a team.
Absolutely. I think there are situations that require a more nuanced approach. I mean, somebody makes a mistake, right? Not out of malice, but maybe they were just inexperienced or they
They didn't know any better.
they made a bad call. Yeah, exactly.
So how do you balance that as a leader? When do you hold that hard line?
It comes down to judgment
Okay.
and evaluating each situation, right? What was the nature of the disloyalty? Was it a pattern or was it an isolated incident? You have to look at the context and the intent and the potential for someone to grow before you make that decision.
Okay. There's also some great advice about decision making. And the ideal seems to be making good decisions quickly. But in the real world, aren't there always trade-offs?
Right. I mean, you don't want to rush into things,
They don't want to be hasty.
but you also don't want to get stuck.
Analysis paralysis.
Right.
So
Exactly.
how do you develop that ability
Mhm.
to make those quick, informed decisions?
It's about having a process, a system in place that allows you to be both efficient and thorough.
Right.
Maybe that's delegating certain decisions or streamlining how you gather information or even setting criteria, for what requires immediate action versus what can wait for a more deliberate process.
Okay. Now, there's this really striking statement here that just jumped out at me. Lack of organization equals lack of leadership.
I love that.
What do you think that means?
Well, I think it goes to the heart of what effective leadership is.
Yeah?
A disorganized leader, they create chaos, they miss deadlines, and ultimately they demotivate their team. It sends the message that they're not in control. And that erodes trust and undermines their authority.
How can someone recognize this in themselves? What are the warning signs?
Are you constantly scrambling, putting out fires, feeling overwhelmed?
always behind?
Projects are always behind schedule,
Yeah.
deadlines are constantly missed. Those are red flags.
Right. So you got to step back and evaluate your, organizational skills.
And if you're leaning towards chaos, there are things you can do. You can implement systems, delegate effectively, prioritize tasks,
Just creating structure.
creating structure. Yeah.
Okay, now let's talk about something that can make or break a business. The budget. There's a lot of emphasis here on the discipline of staying on budget, with some pretty vivid descriptions of what happens when you don't.
And for good reason. I mean, overspending leads to debt, cash flow problems. It can just jeopardize the whole thing. It's a fundamental principle of business.
But for someone who's maybe not naturally good with numbers, are there any tips for getting better at budgeting?
Well, you have to start with being realistic. Don't underestimate costs.
Right.
Always build in a cushion, for unexpected expenses.
Always expect the unexpected?
Right. And utilize those budgeting tools and the software that's available.
Yeah, I mean, technology can be a game changer.
It can. And be honest with yourself about your spending habits. I mean, really track where your money's going.
Be aware.
Be aware, yes.
And it's interesting, this focus on budget ties directly to this idea of respect in leadership. I'm curious about that. How do you see that connection?
Well, respect for your team, respect for your clients, respect for the resources you've been entrusted with. It's all reflected in how you manage the money, right? If you're spending recklessly, it signals that you don't respect the work that went into generating those resources.
Right. It's a reflection of your values.
Exactly.
And it leads to this other observation, which I think is really smart, about pricing. If you price something too high, it won't sell. But if you price it too low, you're undervaluing it. So how do you find that sweet spot?
Well, it's both art and science, right? It involves market research, understanding your competitors, knowing your target customer.
So you got to figure out what the market will bear.
Exactly.
And that can change.
It changes constantly. Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about marketing. And there's some solid advice here about pinpointing your market. I know this sounds basic, but I think a lot of people, myself included, really struggle with this.
It's easy to say, harder to do, right? And it's fundamental. You can't be everything to everyone. You have to really define who that ideal customer is, understand what they want, what they need, and really tailor your message to them.
Can you give me an example of how this might work in the real world?
Sure. Imagine you're launching a line of high-end athletic wear. If you try to market it to, everyone, your message gets diluted. But if you focus on, let's say, women who are, affluent and who prioritize fitness and fashion, then you can create a campaign that really speaks to them, and that's going to increase your chances of success.
You're not trying to be everything to everyone. You're speaking to a very specific group.
Exactly.
And alongside that, there's this real, almost unwavering belief in persistence, never giving up on a good idea, even if you face rejection.
Right.
And it makes me think of all those, stories about products that were initially dismissed, like the Post-it note or even the telephone.
Can you imagine if they'd given up at the first? No.
So it's about knowing that sometimes those rejections are just part of the process.
It might mean the timing isn't right or the approach needs to be tweaked, but it doesn't mean the idea is bad.
You got to keep refining it.
You got to keep pushing, yeah.
So is it about having that go through the wall mentality, never take no for an answer? Is that what you think this is about?
I think persistence is crucial, but it's also about knowing when to adapt. Sometimes a good idea needs to be shelved for a while, or maybe even scrapped.
So you got to recognize when to pivot.
Exactly, when to adjust.
Now, we've talked a lot about making decisions, but there's this really interesting contrast presented here between trusting your gut and the importance of listening to others.
Yeah. How do you reconcile that?
Right. Because they seem kind of opposed to each other.
They do. On the one hand, you have that intuition, that gut feeling, which can be so valuable, especially as you gain experience. But you also can't operate in a vacuum, right? You got to be open to feedback. You got to be open to criticism.
So how do you know when to trust your gut and when to seek outside input?
I think it comes down to self-awareness, knowing your strengths and your weaknesses. Is this feeling based on experience? Or is it driven by fear or some kind of bias? And then it's about creating an environment where people feel safe to share their ideas, even if they challenge your own.
So it's about striking that balance between trusting yourself and being open to others' input.
Exactly.
And even when you make a decision, things don't always go as planned.
Yeah.
And that's where this emphasis on learning from mistakes comes in.
Absolutely. Business is full of unexpected twists and turns. It's messy, it's unpredictable, and it's not about avoiding mistakes altogether.
About learning from them.
It's about using them as opportunities to grow.
Picking yourself up and moving on.
Exactly. Adaptability, the ability to let go of bad ideas, learn from those mistakes, and just pivot. I think that's essential.
Yeah. You got to be flexible.
You got to be flexible. You got to be able to change course when you need to.
Okay. We've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
But there's still so much more to unpack. So much wisdom to mine from this advice.
Oh, yeah, this is just the beginning.
Buckle up.
Buckle up. It's remarkable how much of this advice boils down to character.
Yeah.
It's not just the strategies or the tactics,
It's who you are as a person.
It's who you are at your core.
Yeah.
And speaking of character, there's this advice about confrontation, which, could be a little tricky.
Yeah, I was wondering about that one.
It's presented as a tool, but it's not something to be used lightly.
Right. You gotta be careful.
You gotta be strategic. It's not a knee-jerk reaction. It's about addressing things directly, but with the goal of resolution, not escalation.
Yeah, I think about that saying, choose your battles.
Exactly.
You don't want to create an environment where people are walking on eggshells,
Right. You want people to feel safe to speak up.
But at the same time, you have to set boundaries.
You gotta set boundaries.
And amidst all this talk about, deals and competition, there's this really surprisingly kind of heartfelt emphasis on the importance of family.
It's a reminder that success in business shouldn't come at the expense of, your personal life.
Your happiness.
Your relationships.
It's about balance, right?
It is. It's about having those connections outside of work that bring you joy.
That keep you grounded.
Keep you grounded, yeah.
Now here's something that really caught my eye. This idea that appearances can be deceiving. That you can't judge a book by its cover. Especially when it comes to assessing people's character.
It's about looking beyond the surface, right?
So how do you do that? How do you spot the real deal?
Look for integrity, look for work ethic, look for resilience, and a genuine desire to learn and grow. Those things may not be immediately obvious,
Right.
but they're the hallmarks of someone who's going to go the distance.
Okay, now here's where things get a little tricky. There's this advice about viewing everyone as competition. Is that healthy? Or does it just breed this kind of cutthroat mentality?
I think it's a bit of both. A healthy dose of competition can be motivating. It pushes you to strive for excellence.
But on the flip side, it can also create a really toxic environment.
Right, where people are afraid to collaborate.
So how do you walk that line?
Focus on competing with yourself, trying to be your best, rather than tearing other people down.
Right. Because it's not a zero-sum game.
It's not. There's plenty of room for everyone to succeed.
And it ties into that advice about delivering on your promises. It's not enough to just talk a good game.
Yeah.
You have to actually do it.
You gotta walk the walk.
Right. Your actions speak louder than words.
100%.
Now, there's some pretty strong language here about dealing with sabotage or disloyalty within a team.
Yeah.
And the advice is basically identify those people and get rid of them fast.
I think that speaks to the importance of protecting the culture of your team.
Yeah. But isn't there a risk of overreacting? What if it's just a personality clash or a misunderstanding?
That's where leadership comes in, right?
You gotta be discerning.
You gotta be discerning. You have to assess the situation, gather information, and then make a decision.
That's best for everyone.
That's best for the team as a whole, yes.
And there's a bit of a shift here as we move into the realm of friendship in business,
Oh, interesting.
And the advice acknowledges the value of those connections, but also warns about the potential downsides.
It's a tricky balance, right? Because you spend so much time with the people you work with.
Yeah.
It's natural to form friendships.
Right.
But you got to be careful to maintain those professional boundaries and not let personal feelings cloud your judgment.
Because mixing business and friendship can get messy.
It can.
There's a story here that really stuck with me about, facing some financial hardship and realizing that some people who were considered friends were actually, kind of enjoying the struggles.
Yeah.
So it's a tough lesson.
It is.
But it underscores that you got to be careful about who you trust.
Absolutely.
Both personally and professionally.
100%.
And, they say you find out who your real friends are when times are tough.
Yeah. Adversity reveals character.
That's a good one. Okay. So we've explored the importance of people, the power of passion, the art of negotiation, the dangers of disloyalty, and the complexities of friendship and business.
I can't believe how much we've covered.
I know.
But we're not done yet. There are still a few more things, I think, to explore as we head into the final part of this deep dive.
All right. We've got more ground to cover, more wisdom to unearth.
It's gonna be good.
All right, we're back. Ready to wrap up our deep dive into this treasure trove of business advice?
I know. It's incredible how much we've already covered.
Yeah, but there's still more to explore.
Oh, yeah. Plenty more.
One thing that keeps striking me is how timeless this advice is.
Yeah.
It's not tied to any particular industry or trend.
Like these are those fundamental principles that apply no matter what you're doing.
Okay, so there's this advice about being decisive, which obviously makes sense in, high-pressure business situations. But how does that translate to everyday life?
It's a good question. I think it's about finding that balance, between being informed and trusting your gut.
Right. You don't want to rush into things.
But you also don't want to overthink it.
Analysis paralysis.
Exactly. And that gut feeling often becomes more reliable as you gain experience.
Right.
It's like your subconscious has already processed all the information.
And it's giving you the answer.
It's giving you the answer, yeah.
Okay. There's also this emphasis on knowing your customer.
Oh, that's fundamental.
Which sounds obvious.
Yeah.
But it can be really hard to actually do.
It is. It requires, I think, a combination of research, observation, and empathy. Really putting yourself in their shoes, thinking about, what are their needs, what are their pain points, what motivates them. And today, we have so many tools to help with that, right?
Oh, yeah. Social media, all the analytics you can gather online.
You can really get a deep understanding of your audience.
But it's not just about the data, right? It's about what you do with it.
It's about the insights.
Yeah.
And I think this is something a lot of people struggle with. Staying focused.
Especially today, with so many distractions.
Right. How do you actually do that? How do you tune out the noise and just focus on your goals?
That requires discipline.
Yeah.
It requires prioritization. And it requires saying nay to a lot of things.
Okay, so setting boundaries.
Setting boundaries.
Yeah.
And having clear goals.
And also being mindful of your energy, right? I mean, you can't be on all the time.
Absolutely. You need time to rest and recharge.
To avoid burnout.
To avoid burnout, exactly.
There's a piece of advice here that I found really interesting about balancing practicality and creativity. It's like you need both sides of the coin to really succeed.
It's a tension. I think that exists in so many areas of life,
It does.
especially in business. You have to be practical. You have to be grounded in reality.
You gotta get things done. You gotta get things done, yeah. But you also need that spark of creativity, that ability to think outside the box and come up with new solutions.
So you got to find that balance
You gotta find that balance.
between the logic and the imagination.
And sometimes it's about recognizing your own strengths and weaknesses. Maybe you're a visionary leader,
Right.
but you're not so good with the details.
So you need someone to complement you.
You need someone to compliment you.
Exactly. It's about building a team that have all the pieces.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm just struck by how much wisdom there is here.
You too.
It can be a lot to take in,
It can.
but I think the key is to just focus on those things that resonate with you,
Right.
The things that spark your imagination, that inspire you to take action.
Yeah. It's about finding those nuggets that are going to help you on your journey.
And one thing I think we should all keep in mind is that the business world is constantly changing.
It's always evolving.
So we have to be adaptable. We have to be curious.
I got to keep learning.
We got to keep learning.
Yeah. So it's not just about achieving success.
It's about the journey.
It's about the journey.
Right.
And on that note, I want to leave you with this question. What are you most passionate about? What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind?
Those are good questions.
Yeah.
Something to think about. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
We hope you've gained some valuable insights, maybe some new perspective.
Maybe a few aha moments.
And as you go out there and pursue your own dreams, remember to stay curious, stay focused, and never stop learning.
That's the key. Never stop learning.